There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being known by many people and understood by very few. From being seen constantly and almost never truly known. Rock Hudson understood that loneliness. And he also understood, through most of his adult life, the particular relief of having at least one person who knew him in full and stayed anyway. Rock Hudson was, through the 1950s and 1960s, one of the biggest movie stars in the world. Tall, handsome, possessed of a warmth that came through the screen effortlessly. He played romantic leads and light comedies with a natural ease that made the work look simple, and the audiences who loved him were devoted in the particular way of people who feel they know someone, who have spent enough time in the presence of a person's projected warmth to believe they understand something real about them. But the public version of Rock Hudson was, to a very significant degree, exactly that, a version. A carefully constructed presentation that managed, with considerable professional help and considerable personal discipline, to conceal the fundamental fact of who he was. He was gay in an era when that fact, if publicly known, would have ended his career immediately and completely. He had no choice, if he wanted to work in the industry he had built his life around, but to live inside a very particular kind of performance, not on screen, but off it. Every day, for decades. The toll of that sustained performance on a person's inner life is difficult to fully imagine if you haven't experienced something comparable. The constant vigilance, the careful management of every relationship, the inability to speak honestly with most of the people you spend your time with. The sense of being always slightly behind a wall, close enough to reach through in moments, but never able to step all the way out. There were friends, a small number, people who had known him long enough and well enough to know the truth and who had chosen to keep it, who served a function in his life that went beyond ordinary friendship. They were, for him, the only spaces where the wall came down, where he could be who he actually was, without performance or management or the constant vigilance of presenting a version of himself that the world would accept. In their company, he rested. Not from work, from the work of being someone he wasn't. That particular gift of a friendship where the performance stops, where the whole person can be present, is rare. And for someone who had to perform as consistently and as completely as Rock Hudson did, it was not just valuable. It was necessary. Without it, the sustained performance of a false self would likely have become impossible to maintain. The friendship was, in the most literal sense, what kept him together. Maybe you've had something like that. Maybe there is, or has been, a friendship in your life where you don't have to be anything you're not. Where the careful self-management you carry in most of your relationships simply isn't necessary. Where you can say what you actually think, or admit to what you're actually feeling, or acknowledge something difficult without calculating whether the other person can handle it. A friendship that is genuinely free. Most people have had at least one friendship like this in their life, though not everyone has one right now. And the ones who no longer have it often describe its absence as a kind of ache, a specific deficit that other social connections, however numerous and however genuinely caring, don't quite fill. Because there's no substitute for being fully known. And the rarity of it makes it precious in a way that's hard to overstate. Here's something gentle to consider. If you have a friendship like this, someone in whose company the performance reliably stops, maybe this is a week to be actively grateful for it. Not just the background gratitude of knowing it exists, but the particular, deliberate, expressed gratitude of telling the person, "I know what you give me. I know how rare this is, and I don't take it for granted." Most people in these friendships never say it out loud. The friendship is so close, so familiar, that explicit acknowledgement can feel unnecessary, almost redundant. But it isn't. Being told directly and clearly that you are someone's genuine safe space, that your friendship is the one where the performance stops, is a gift of a very particular kind. It tells the other person that what they offer is seen, that it is received, that it matters. Rock Hudson's friends who knew him in full, who had been inside the wall, were among the most important people in his life. Not because of what they did in any active or dramatic sense, but because of what they simply were, the only witnesses to the complete person, the only ones who knew him without the management. And in being that, they gave him something no amount of public adoration could have provided. They gave him the experience of being real. And if you don't currently have a friendship like this, if you find yourself looking for that kind of genuine, unmanaged connection and not finding it, maybe this is worth taking seriously as a gap worth addressing. Not by immediately finding someone and attempting a deep disclosure, but by paying attention to the relationships in your life that have the potential to become this, and investing in them. By being a little more honest in the conversations that have been mostly surface level. By offering something real and seeing what comes back. The friendships that become safe spaces don't start that way. They become that way through a process that usually involves someone going first, someone taking a small risk of real honesty and finding that the other person met it with care rather than judgment. And then another small risk, and another careful reception. And gradually, over time, something builds. Something where the wall comes down and stays down, and both people can breathe a little more freely than they do in most of the places they spend their time. If you're watching this tonight, maybe there is someone in your life who could become this for you, or who already is this and needs to be told. So take a slow breath, and maybe, this week, honor the friendship where you are most fully yourself, either by telling the person what they give you, or by taking one small step toward the kind of honesty that could build something like it. You deserve to be known in full, and so does the person who gives you that gift. There's one more thing worth sitting with here, something about what happens when the person who knew you in full is no longer here. When the friend with whom the performance reliably stopped has died or moved away or drifted out of your life in one of the many ways that people drift out, and you find yourself, suddenly or gradually, without that particular space of being fully known. This is one of the less discussed losses of the later years. Not the loss of romantic love, which gets much of the cultural attention around grief, but the loss of the deep friendship, the person who knew the whole version, who held the memory of who you were across decades, who could say, "I remember when," in a way that made the past feel present and real. That loss is significant, and it tends to be mourned quietly, without the formal structures that accompany other kinds of loss. If you've lost a friendship like this, the grief of it is real, and it is worth being given the same gentleness you'd give to other losses, not just mentioned and moved past. Acknowledged, named for what it was, one of the most valuable things a life can hold, and a real loss when it's gone. And then, when the acknowledgement has been made, when the grief has been given some space, it may be worth asking whether the capacity for that kind of friendship still exists. Whether there is someone in your current life who could become, with time and honesty and mutual care, something like what you lost. Not a replacement. No friendship replaces another. But something new that serves a similar function. Someone with whom, over time, the wall can gradually come down. Most people who have built one deep friendship have the capacity to build another. Not immediately, not without effort, but the capacity is there, learned, partly, from the friendship that came before, from knowing what it feels like to be fully known, and what it took to build that, and from being willing to begin the process again, even when beginning feels harder than continuing would have been. Rock Hudson carried his truth alone through most of his life, privately, carefully, at significant cost to his inner freedom. And what gave him the most relief, in the friendships where that truth was known, was simply the experience of not having to manage himself, of being able to be the full person with all of it in front of someone who received it without flinching. That experience doesn't require extraordinary circumstances. It requires only honesty and someone willing to receive it. Maybe this week you can move one small degree toward it, toward the friendship where you are most fully yourself, or toward the beginning of one, if that's where you are. Either way, the direction is the same. Toward being known. Toward the particular relief of no longer having to manage what someone sees. So take a slow breath, and maybe, this week, take one small step toward the friendship where the performance stops. That's always worth moving toward.